The NES saw the arrival of countless legendary games, but one title in particular stands out as a pioneer in the stealth action genre, Metal Gear. Released in North America in 1988, Metal Gear was the beginning of what would become one of the most influential franchises in gaming history. Developed by Konami and helmed by the now legendary game designer Hideo Kojima, it introduced gamers to a new style of gameplay that emphasized stealth, strategy, and narrative depth. Although the NES version differs from its original release on the MSX2 in Japan, it remains an important milestone for the series. Metal Gear originally began as a game for the MSX2, a Japanese home computer. The development was led by a young Hideo Kojima, who was relatively unknown at the time. Kojima was assigned to the project to make a war-themed action game, but due to hardware limitations, he couldn't create the fast-paced action game he envisioned. This limitation forced Kojima to think outside the box, leading to the creation of a game that focused on evasion and stealth rather than direct combat. The concept of avoiding enemies and gathering information became the core gameplay mechanic, giving birth to the stealth genre. After the success of the MSX2 version, Konami decided to bring Metal Gear to the NES, a platform with a much larger international audience. However, the NES version was not a direct port. Many changes were made without Kojima's direct involvement. The NES version introduced new areas, altered gameplay mechanics, and significantly modified the storyline, leading to a different experience from the original game. Despite these changes, the NES version maintained the stealth elements that made the MSX2 version groundbreaking. Metal Gear is set in a fictional timeline in the mid-1980s, where the Cold War tensions are still palpable. The game follows Solid Snake, a rookie operative of the secret military unit known as Foxhound. Snake is sent on his first mission to infiltrate Outer Heaven, a heavily fortified military base led by a mysterious figure known only as the Mercenary Leader. Snake's objective is to locate and destroy Metal Gear, a bipedal tank capable of launching nuclear missiles from any location on the globe. This mobile nuclear weapon threatens global security, and it's up to Snake to prevent it from being deployed. Along the way, Snake must rescue captured allies, gather intelligence, and avoid detection as he ventures deeper into Outer Heaven. The mission becomes more complicated as he uncovers betrayal and conspiracies within his own ranks. While the story in the NES version was simplified and altered compared to the MSX2 release, it still retained the core elements of infiltration, espionage, and a looming nuclear threat. The plot twists and the sense of danger were early examples of narrative-driven gameplay that would later define the series. The game introduced players to a new type of gameplay that was unlike anything they had experienced before. It was a game where careful planning, patience, and strategy were more important than brute force. It revolves around stealth. Players control Solid Snake as he sneaks through Outer Heaven, avoiding detection from guards, surveillance cameras, and security systems. Instead of engaging enemies head-on, the game encourages players to use stealth tactics, such as hiding behind objects, sneaking past guards, and using distractions to remain unseen. If Snake is spotted, alarms go off, causing enemies to swarm his location. This forces players to think on their feet, either finding a place to hide or fighting their way out. The game is divided into various areas and buildings within the Fortress of Outer Heaven. Exploration is key, as players must find hidden paths, collect key cards to open locked doors, and gather useful items like rations, weapons, and tools. The game often rewards thorough exploration with new equipment, such as explosives to destroy walls, silencers to make weapons quieter, and gas masks to traverse hazardous areas. This exploration-based design adds a sense of discovery to the stealth gameplay. Managing resources is a crucial part of the game. Players have limited ammunition, rations, and health, making it important to use them wisely. Knowing when to engage in combat and when to avoid it entirely is a key strategy for success. Metal Gear was one of the first games to introduce an inventory system, allowing players to choose their weapons and gadgets based on the situation. This system encouraged players to plan their actions and think critically. Unlike traditional action games, the boss battles require strategy rather than just fast reflexes. Each boss has unique attack patterns, requiring players to use the right weapons and tactics to defeat them. These encounters are a test of the player's understanding of the game mechanics, often requiring specific items or approaches to overcome. The NES version differed significantly from the MSX2 original, with Hideo Kojima having little involvement in the changes. This led to discrepancies in the story, level design, and gameplay, which Kojima later criticized. Despite these differences, the NES version introduced many Western gamers to the world of stealth-based gameplay for the first time. One of the most significant changes in the NES version is the addition of a jungle area at the start of the game. In the original MSX2 version, the game begins with Snake infiltrating Outer Heaven. The NES version, however, starts with a trek through a jungle filled with traps and enemies. This change was not part of Kojima's vision, but it added a unique opening segment to the NES version. The NES version suffered from translation and localization issues, leading to several notorious typos and oddities in the English script. For example, the phrase "I feel asleep" became a meme among fans due to its awkward translation. Despite the criticisms from Hideo Kojima and some fans of the original, Metal Gear on the NES became a cult classic. It was one of the first games to introduce complex storytelling and stealth mechanics to a Western audience, paving the way for the popularity of stealth action games in the future. It utilized environmental storytelling techniques that were groundbreaking for its time. Details in the game's environments, such as hidden messages, items placed in specific locations, and enemy patterns, provided clues about the plot and the world of Outer Heaven. This technique would become a staple in future entries of the series. The NES version introduced the concept of communication devices, which would later evolve into the famous codec in later Metal Gear games. Players could receive hints, guidance, and story updates through communication with allies, adding a layer of narrative depth to the gameplay. Creating a stealth-based game on the NES was no easy feat. The limited hardware meant that the developers had to use creative solutions to simulate stealth mechanics. For example, the enemy AI was rudimentary, relying on set patrol patterns and line-of-sight detection. The developers used visual indicators, such as exclamation points over enemy heads, to indicate when Snake had been detected, a simple but effective way to communicate stealth to the player. The 8-bit graphics and sound also limited the atmosphere that could be achieved, but Konami managed to create a tense and immersive environment with catchy, minimalist tunes and distinct sound effects that heightened the sense of danger. Metal Gear for the NES was a groundbreaking title that introduced a generation of gamers to the concept of stealth action gameplay. Despite its differences from the original MSX2 version, the NES version remains a classic in its own right, remembered for its innovative mechanics, gripping story, and challenging gameplay. The game laid the foundation for what would become one of the most influential franchises in gaming history. It showed that video games could be more than just action-packed experiences. They could also tell complex stories, require careful planning, and reward patient, thoughtful play. The game is a true pioneer, and its legacy can still be felt in modern gaming. If you're a fan of the series or just curious about the origins of stealth gaming, Metal Gear on the NES is a piece of gaming history worth revisiting, offering a nostalgic glimpse into the early days of espionage and tactical gameplay.